Hello, and welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. My name is Maddie, Kendra Nilsson's COO, and today you'll be listening to episode 175, Healing Resentments, a couples therapist guide to rekindling love with Dr. Wyatt. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome back to Fulfillment Therapy. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Wyatt, here with us. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Wyatt, he is a couples therapist and he's been in private practice since 2004. And he's helped over 1,000 couples heal their resentments and rekindle their love. That is quite the number. Did you count those up or how do you know that number?
I averaged, how many couples I see over the years and I averaged them up one day and got to right around 1,000.
That's very impressive. That's a lot of couples. And you predominantly work with couples, is that right?
That's all I do.
So you must love it quite a bit.
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons, but I love it more than I hate it or I wouldn't be doing it.
It does require, maybe you don't even remember if you've been mostly working with couples, but it does require, I feel like, more energy, especially those ones that get pretty heated. Right?
Yes.
When I compare my individuals with my couples, definitely more energy expended for sure.
Yeah, I have to have boundaries with how many couples I see per week so I don't get burned out. It can be very rewarding when you see couples start to heal and move forward.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm excited to ask you questions. Do you mind if I jump in and pick your brain about your expertise in the field?
Sure. Go ahead. Whatever you want to ask.
Okay, so my first question for you is, what are some of the big resentments you see in marriages after kids come along?
The top ones are communication, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, conflict style, parenting, finances, in-laws, uneven workload, and feeling voiceless. I would say the biggest ones usually are conflict style, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, communication. Those four are almost always on the list.
Yeah. Your experience with working with those 1,000 couples, what do you think if you were to put that into one thing, the main thing that people come to you about, the biggest resentment? Could you say it in one thing? What do you think that would be?
I'd say the biggest resentment is not having needs met.
What is one of your go-to things if they don't have their needs met?
I always start by having couples list off their top categories of resentment. So that list of 9 common categories I listed a few minutes ago, I list off those 9 for couples and I have them start thinking, which categories do I have resentment in toward my partner? And it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just to help them get thinking. And then I have them tell me what categories they have resentments. And I make a list for both partners. I train them on one of my tools called the REUNITE tool. And we work through one resentment at a time until we're at a good spot. And then we move on to the next resentment and then the next resentment. Because from my experience, nothing goes well when there's active resentments. It's hard to feel like friends with someone you resent, hard to have intimacy with someone you resent. So we camp out on resentments for the first phase of our work until we work through all of them.
That makes sense. And then a natural follow-up question with that would be, do you and your wife do this?
Yes, I try to practice what I preach. So all the tools and strategies I teach to my couples, I try to implement them the best I can in my marriage as well. And that's one of them. Yeah. So when her and I have resentments, we make sure we try to sit down and use the REUNITE tool to work through them, because if we have resentments in our relationship, everything breaks down for us too.
And I think it was in the previous one that we did, right? You haven't mentioned that you are also married to a therapist.
Correct. Yeah. I'm also married to a therapist. I've been a therapist since 2005, 2004, and she's been a therapist for about 3 to 4 years. So now, yes, we're both therapists, and that definitely has some advantages and some challenges at times too.
Do you mind sharing what those are?
Yeah, we're both more mindful than the average couple of thoughts and feelings and the importance of working through things and not bottling things up. It can help both of us talk and interact with our kids. It can help us compromise on parenting with where I land and where she lands. But it definitely helps that we're both in the thick of it working with clients, because when you work with clients, especially couples, you can see yourself in those relationships. Every session, you're helping them, but in a way, they're also helping you, because it's bringing to mind, oh, I need to make sure I don't do that, or I need to make sure I start doing that. So I think that's a fringe benefit of working with couples, is a constant reminder of what to do better in our own marriage. And so those are some of the advantages. I would say the disadvantage would be she has her own style, I have my style. And so when it comes to couples work, sometimes we have to agree to disagree with how are we going to handle this? What tools should we use? because I can't show up as the expert with my wife because obviously that doesn't go well.
Right.
And likewise, we have to kind of take off that expert hat when we're dealing with our marriage and try to find a method that's going to work for both of us where we both feel like we have a voice. Marriage is made up of two individuals who are so unique, come from their own culture, even if they're the same race. There's more variation within race than between races, they say. And so you're constantly grappling with two sets of preferences, values, ideals. And so the art of compromise is huge, I think, for a healthy and successful marriage.
Well, I'm very interested in, I don't know that you could succinctly even share much about it, but this REUNITE tool, I've never really heard much about that. Is there a way you could talk a little bit about what that is so we
Yeah.
can understand?
Yeah. Sure. One analogy to think of the Reunite tool, it's like when you go bowling and they put the guardrails down so your ball doesn't go in the gutter. That's what the Reunite tool does for the conversation. Because a lot of couples, you have resentments and you can't even talk about them without escalating and getting heated. The Reunite tool is just a method to help both partners feel safe, feel heard, and get much further in that conversation than they would otherwise. The way I view resentments is it takes two things. If you're the one with the resentment, you need to feel heard. You want your partner to own something. You want them to empathize with how it's impacted you. You want an apology for the piece they're owning. The Reunite tool provides all that. And then it ends with the second part of healing, which is change. We end with making amends. What are the adjustments moving forward? What are the changes? That is an essential step to forgiveness because even if your partner owns and empathizes and apologizes, but they don't make any changes, then that resentment is going to get even deeper. You need both. You want to feel heard. You want your partner to own something, empathy, apology, that you really need to see long-term change. And so the Reunite tool is just a way to help couples move along in that process much faster than they would otherwise.
I love that. I love how it gets really succinct and dialed in a very simple way. And then you systematically go through each of those resentments. I can see how that would be very beneficial, not even to your clients only, but like you said, in your marriage too.
Yeah, and we take turns. Usually each partner will have 4 to 6 resentments when they first start working with me. And so one session, partner A will choose their resentment, and then we use the Reunite tool and work through it. The next session, partner B will choose one of their resentments, and we work it through the Reunite tool. Every session, we bounce back and forth so that neither party is on the hot seat over and over again.
And a follow-up question to that as well is, do you feel like your clients ever then get stuck being problem focused, or do you feel like they're able to move out of it with resolution?
Well, it's a little bit of both. The Reunite tool allows them to share their feelings and feel heard and process through the hurt. And then it ends with action. So it kind of ends with the problem solving, but it's not problem solving through it. The Reunite tool is much more process oriented and reflection and empathy oriented. And so it's primarily that. And then at the end, you get into the problem solving.
Right. Right. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would be beneficial and how a lot of people would feel relief finally working through that with a third party.
Right. I mean, couples will contact me and say, "Hey, we have all these resentments. Can you send us your article on the Reunite tool?" And I'll send it to them and I'll say, "Just let me know if you need help working through it." And 9 times out of 10, couples need help because it's hard to learn the tool and then apply it to your own resentment. Normally, I tell couples they have to do it with me 4 to 6 times, the Reunite tool, before they get proficient enough where they can start using it on their own.
My husband and I have both had therapists before, together and separate. Therapists need therapists. We all need
Yeah.
that extra help, that third party
Yes.
sympathy objective to be helping us through things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, because that's the hard part with marriage. You're constantly dealing with two people's subjective reality, what they think is right. Yeah.
Definitely.
So to have a third party speak into that can be helpful.
Yeah. A question for you then is, do you have any tips for stopping that resentment before it takes root, whether that's in marriage or parenting? And what works?
One tool that I recommend to increase praise and is to decrease the likelihood of resentment creeping in is I call it the Bullseye Question. And what you do, it takes 5 minutes. So it's very simple, but it's hard to execute. Ideally, more days than not, at least 4 days a week. You take turns asking this question: what's one thing I did right today? And what's one thing I could have done better? The first part of that question is good for both partners because when you hear what you did right, that feels good. But it's also good for the partner who has to highlight what you did right, because it makes you have to look for the good. Because often we look for the bad, right? It's just like what our partner did wrong. That's what we want to say right off the bat. So to find what they did right from the day, sometimes that takes a little more intentionality. And to make it a deeper compliment, I recommend, instead of just saying, "Hey, I appreciated how you shoveled the driveway," you would then say, "What does that say about your partner's traits or character?" For example, "I appreciate how you shoveled the driveway. And what that says about you is you have such a strong work ethic," or "You're so dependable. You just do the chores whether you feel like it or not." Or "That was you being thoughtful because it was my turn to shovel, but you did it for me because you know." So you want to take it to that level where you reflect on what it says about their character or their trait. The other side of the bullseye, when you say, "What's one thing I could have done better?" That's a game changer, because that is inviting your partner to vent, for them to get out anything that they're building up. It could be something big, it could be something small. But the analogy I use, like a bike tire. So every day when you're living with your partner, needs aren't going to be met perfectly, feelings are going to get hurt, things are going to frustrate you, but we don't have a way to get that out. So it's like putting air into a bike tire. And if you just keep putting air into a tire over and over, it's going to blow up. The bullseye is like a little release valve every day, letting the air out so it doesn't blow up. The ground rule, this is the hard part. When you get that constructive feedback, all you're allowed to say back is, "Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the feedback." And then when you get the feedback, this is where the work comes in. I suggest considering 3 buckets you can put the feedback into in your head. This is where you mold over the next day when you get feedback, and you think about, what bucket should I put that in? The first bucket is the fluke bucket. That means what they said I could have done better, that was all circumstance, not my fault. I'm putting that in the fluke bucket. Ethically, if you hear the same feedback more than once, you cannot put it in the fluke bucket. And you don't say out loud what bucket you're putting this into. You're just doing this in your head. The second bucket is all me. That's the bucket that says, "Oh man, what they just said, I could do better. I know I'm bad at that, and I got to really work on that." That's all me, no excuses. That's the all me bucket. The third bucket, which is the most common, is partially me. And that's the bucket that says, "Okay, what they just said, I could have done better. Some of that was circumstance, not my fault. Some of that I think is my partner's sensitivities being projected onto me. That's not my fault. But there was a piece there that I could have done better." And that's the part I'm going to look at. So the main principle behind that process is I'm in control of discerning the kernel of truth in the feedback. Because your partner's constructive feedback may not be 100% correct, but you can almost guarantee that there is a kernel of truth in there somewhere. But because I'm in control of discerning the kernel of truth, that keeps my guard down and my internal motivation up for follow through to make an adjustment.
Right. I really loved how you talked about that. And I don't think I've heard it talked about in quite that way. Increasing praise makes a lot of sense. The Gottmans talk about
Yeah.
this, the golden ratio. Love that. And
Yep.
really, how many of us do the 5-to-1 ratio, 5 positive to 1 negative? Not very much. I'd like to say I do it often and constantly working on that. But the bullseye questions, I hadn't really heard about something in quite that way. So let me restate this to see if I got that right. You talk about one thing they did right, or is that part of the increase the praise?
So the bullseye is you take turns asking, "What's one thing I did right today? And what's one thing I could have done better?"
Okay, so that is part of the bullseye questions. And then you put that feedback into that bucket. Is it fluke with all me or is partially me? And then the hardest part, saying thank you for the feedback. Like the that strong woman within me is like, no. But at the same time, really, truly strong people are going to have that humility and be able to simply say that. But I bet it requires a lot of practice. Probably something I should practice.
That's the hardest part, because there's something in us that just wants to justify ourselves, defend ourselves, to prove that what our partner thinks we did is not correct. And I just encourage people to let go of that desire. You're not going to talk your partner out of their experience. Let them have their experience, but you're in control of deciding what's the kernel of truth in the feedback. If you get into a debate of, "I didn't do that, that's not how I came across," you're not going to win that debate, because you're not going to talk your partner out of what they experienced. It's just much wiser to sidestep that whole argument. Instead, just thank your partner for the feedback, mull it over, and look for the kernel of truth.
Yeah, very well said. In addition to that, in marriages, we get into these negative cycles and we're constantly reacting to each other's reactions. How do you think that we could stay more grounded and have greater differentiation and prevent ourselves from going into that spiral of reactivity? It's just not very easy to remain grounded and stop that pattern. Do you have any
Mm.
tips for greater success when it comes to that?
So I recommend the model of it is called a diamond. At the tip of the diamond, at the very top, if you can visualize this, one or both partners calls the word flooded. And flooded just means, whoa, we're starting to get heated. Ideally, you catch it in the pre-flooded stage where you're just barely starting to ramp up. You can tell your heart rate starting to increase, tone is starting to get a little sharper, and you just call flooded. And you can call flooded if you're getting flooded or if you're calm, but you think your partner's getting flooded. Just don't say, you're getting flooded, because that's gonna, make it worse. So that's the tip right up here. And one mistake I see some couples make is their partner will call flooded, but they ignore it and they just override it because they think we're not flooded. We can keep talking. So you have to respect the word because it needs to become a boundary word. I want to feel like I can call flooded and my partner's going to respect that word. The more flooded we become, the less impulse control we have. When you have interactions when you're flooded, that's when you do the most damage. It creates a lot of scar tissue emotionally and it makes it harder to rebound. Avoiding interactions when one or both of you are flooded is extremely important. Catching things when they're pre-flooded, calling flooded, then you go your separate ways for 20 minutes up to 24 hours. That just means we're not going to be in each other's hair. Like you got to get out of the bathroom together, get out of the kitchen together, give each other a break so that you can lower your heart rate. And so that's going to be different for each person, whether it's I got to go outside and take a walk or listen to music or take a shower, but anything to get you out of fight, flight, or freeze. Once you're both relaxed, then you come back together and you pull out the REUNITE tool. The REUNITE tool then creates structure and safety because a lot of couples don't want to come back and talk it over because they fear it's just going to re-escalate. So why would we do that? Let's just sweep it under the rug. But then we have all these unresolved issues and now our walls are getting thicker. So to come back together at the base of that pyramid, at the base of the diamond, and pull out the REUNITE tool, now we have a safe way of processing through what we both felt in that conflict. And so that hopefully we're learning from it to become closer moving forward.
Those are wonderfully said. Again, if I'm understanding correctly, then you talked about three things. So the REUNITE tool, the Bullseye Question, the question or questions?
I call it question, but within that question are two questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is it the flooded tool or what would that third one called?
I call it the diamond.
Diamond. Okay. If listeners can just remember those things, the diamond, the Bullseye Question, and the REUNITE tool, those would be enough to get them started on changing some of those patterns and having more success in their marriage. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they can Google REUNITE tool and they'll find the article. It talks about the concept of flooding and deflooding. And then the REUNITE tool is included in that article so they can use that in their own marriage.
I'll put that in the show notes as well. Is that article something that you wrote or is that something you discovered?
That's something I wrote.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm excited to peruse that myself. Well,
Yes.
is there any final tips or advice you'd like to give us on how to take our relationships or marriages specifically to that next level of fulfillment that maybe we haven't discussed so far?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, there's an analogy I love, which is become a one eye in, one eye out partner. And what that means, and this overlaps with some of your concepts that you shared on my podcast. If you're two eyes out, that means you're the kind of partner where you're just focusing on your spouse's needs, what your spouse feels, and you lose yourself. If you're two eyes in, then you're self-absorbed and you're only thinking about what you need and want and what's best for you. The goal is to become one eye in, one eye out. That means tracking me and my needs and what my preferences are, while I'm also mindful of you and your preferences and your needs. And now I'm learning to think about those two sets of variables and allowing those two sets of variables, my preferences and yours, to inform my decision making in our relationship step by step. And the more I do that, the more effective I'm becoming as a partner because I'm becoming more considerate, more thoughtful, and I'm not over focusing on me. It's a great way to balance those two sets of needs because that's what marriage is, right? Marriage is learning how to live effectively with two opposing sets of needs. If you can continually try to be more mindful of my needs and your needs, and how can I make decisions that are going to honor both, you're becoming a more effective partner. And that's all you can control.
Grateful that you brought up needs because on yours, I didn't share much about that, but that is something that I love talking about. A big component of fulfillment therapy is those needs, those unmet needs. It is a big aspect of a relationship and how you talk about that balance, that give and take of one eye in and one eye out. I've never really thought about that way to put it, a one eye in and one eye out, but that's beautifully said and a great way to remind ourselves that it isn't just about one person or the other person, but that balance that's important.
That's right. And that's what really creates a healthy marriage, right? When both partners are willing to do that. Marriage gets unhealthy when one or both partners are two eyes in or two eyes out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. And where can we find you?
My podcast would be a good first step. My podcast is called The Dr. Wyatt Show. I try to put out one episode a week, usually about 15 minutes, and they're very practical. So that's a great resource. You also can find me on all the social channels at Dr. Wyatt Fisher. And my website is also drwyattfisher.com.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I'll put that in the show notes so we can find you. And thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kendra.
Thank you so much for listening to our conversation with Dr. Wyatt. We hope you got lots of helpful tips and tricks to avoid the resentments or to help clear them up in your life. As always, please check out our show notes so that way you can stay up to date with all the new and exciting things that are happening. As a reminder, we have 3 new exciting courses. We have a marriage course, a personal growth course, and a business course that will be released on January 1st, 2025. We hope to see you there. Have a wonderful day.